Title Shadows of the Absent, a story of loss, longing, and becoming the silent home. Jared's childhood unfolded in a house stitched together by silence and survival. Their small apartment sat on the edge of a rusted neighborhood, flanked by cracked sidewalks and hollow-eyed buildings. Inside, life was functional, but never full. His mother, Eliza, was a woman forged in the fire of hard choices. She wore cheap sneakers with holes in the soles and denim that had been patched more times than she could count. She was love and labor in one breath, working night shifts at Sally's Diner where the smell of burnt coffee clung to her like perfume. Her eyes always looked like they hadn't slept, and her hugs were warm but brief, like she had to ration even her affection. There were no framed photos on the walls, no baby albums or family videos. The living room had one old radio that buzzed static on rainy days, and a couch that sagged like it too had given up hope. Jared never heard his mother say his father's name. When he asked, her answers were short and clipped. He left. That's all you need to know. But for Jared, it wasn't enough. The absence loomed, a yawning void. Not knowing his father felt like trying to finish a puzzle with half the pieces burned. One day, while cleaning the hall closet, Jared stumbled upon a worn shoebox buried beneath old blankets. Inside, he found a dog-eared photo of a man in a leather jacket, his eyes shadowed by the brim of a baseball cap. The back read, Anthony, Summer '01. Before he could study the face, Eliza appeared, snatched the box, and stuffed it away. Her voice trembled. He doesn't deserve to be remembered. And that was it. The lid was sealed again, not just on the box, but on a part of Jared's soul. Searching for shadows. Jared's adolescence was a maze of loneliness, half-truths, and aching questions. In school, he became a master of camouflage. He laughed when others laughed, stayed quiet when the topic turned to fathers. At father-son events, he'd hang back by the vending machine, watching other boys play catch or build birdhouses while pretending to be too cool to care. But he cared. Deeply. He once followed a man down the street who resembled the photo from the shoebox, heart pounding, palms sweating. The man turned into a store, and Jared lost him in the crowd. He never told anyone about it, but the memory stayed lodged in his ribs like a splinter. Puberty hit, but Jared had no one to ask about the changes. He shaved for the first time using a dull razor and a fogged-up mirror. He asked a gym teacher how to tie a tie, but got brushed off with a shrug. The other boys noticed his detachment, his awkwardness. Some teased, others ignored. By 17, Jared had stopped asking who he was. It hurt too much. Instead, he filled the hole with noise. Loud music, late nights, empty friendships. He dated girls who wanted to fix him, but he couldn't be fixed by someone else's love. What he needed was a foundation he never received. The edge of enough. On his 21st birthday, Jared stood on the rooftop of his apartment building. The city sprawled beneath him like a sleeping beast, glowing with 1,000 indifferent lights. He had no party, no calls, just a bottle of warm beer and a storm gathering above. The rain came slow at first, then hard, soaking his clothes, his skin, his very bones. Thunder cracked like a reminder of every time he had cried into his pillow with no one to hear. In that moment, alone, shivering, tired, he decided something had to change. He couldn't keep living with a question mark carved into his chest. He needed to find Anthony. The hunt for ghosts. But finding a ghost is no simple thing. He had almost nothing to go on. A first name, a blurry photo, and a faded memory of his mother once mentioning North Carolina in a phone call. Jared spent the next year tracing shadows. He took shifts at night so he could spend his days searching. He dug through old public records in dusty municipal buildings. He scanned online ancestry sites and posted in obscure forums with subject lines like, "Looking for Anthony Carter, help." He reached out to old neighbors who might have known his mother back then. Most of the time, they didn't remember or didn't care. He followed dead leads, an Anthony Carter in Detroit who turned out to be a jazz musician with no kids, an Anthony Carter in Florida who responded to an email with a polite, "Wrong guy, sorry." Jared even drove 7 hours once to knock on a door in the rain. A man answered. His voice was gruff but kind. "No, son, I'm not your father, but I hope you find him." The rejections didn't just bruise. They reopened the wound. But the worst was the silence. The unanswered calls, the ignored messages, the people who never responded because they didn't think it mattered. But to Jared, it mattered more than they could know. Then, almost a year later, he found a glimmer, a court document buried in a state child support case file from 2004. The case was dismissed, but the name matched. Anthony Carter, age mid-30s at the time. Last known address, Millridge, Virginia. It was a dying town. One road in, one road out. No website, no real map markers, but Jared packed his bag, printed the address, and boarded a bus. The face behind the fog. The house was barely standing, chipped wood, a rusting gate. The wind carried the scent of dry earth and old regrets. Jared stood at the door, heart rattling like loose change in a jar. His hand hovered before he finally knocked. The door creaked open. A man, tired, gray at the temples, shoulders slumped, stood there. His eyes squinted, confused. Jared knew instantly. The face was older, weathered, but unmistakable. "Anthony Carter?" Jared asked. "I am. Who's asking?" Jared's throat tightened. I think I'm your son." The silence that followed wasn't just still, it was thick, ancient. It pressed against both of them like a wall. Anthony's face went pale. "Eliza's boy?" Jared nodded. Anthony stepped aside, wordlessly. Inside, the house smelled of sawdust and loneliness. The furniture was sparse aside, the rooms too quiet. They talked, or tried to. Anthony fumbled with words. "I didn't know how to be a dad. I thought leaving was better than staying and failing." Jared's voice was ice. "You didn't give me the chance to choose." They sat in that discomfort for hours. Jared wanted to scream. Anthony wanted to hide, but they stayed. Two men learning to look at each other without running. Becoming whole. The following weeks weren't easy. There was no Hollywood reconciliation, no hugs that solved everything, but there were conversations and silences that began to heal instead of hurt. Anthony tried. He showed up for calls, asked about Jared's job, his life, his music. Once he even mailed an old watch that had belonged to Jared's grandfather. A quiet gesture, but it meant something. Jared didn't forgive everything, but he forgave enough. The light within. Years later, Jared became a school counselor. He worked with boys who came from fractured homes. He listened to their silences, read between their bravado. He offered them a steady voice in the chaos. He kept a copy of that old photo of Anthony in his drawer, not as a symbol of what was lost, but of what was found. Whenever a student whispered, "I don't know who I am," Jared would lean forward and say, "You get to decide. You. Not the people who left. Not the pain. You." And he meant it. Because once he was a boy in the dark. But now he had learned to carry his own light.